Next up, we have Warlock, starting with Walking Dead. This series just concluded and ran for many, many seasons longer than it probably should have. I stopped watching years ago, but now it's back as a 3-cost 2/5 with Taunt. If you discard this minion, summon it. It's kind of weird to me that there's like 3 cards that actually care about, like discard synergy stuff in all of the game. But like, this is actually a pretty good one. If you do have things, like say you're playing a deck that has like Lakari Fellhound, they have that, you could pretty handily get like the 3/8 in the Walking Dead in play on turn 4. The problem, there just isn't enough actual payoffs, right? There's aren't enough actual payoffs for discard. Like this is one, and there's like Jeklik, and there's like the kill your opponent's guy one, but that's like it. And I feel like there needs to be more. I think there's like one more in this set, but there's just not enough. So I feel like discard is a mechanic, like the discard synergy stuff within Warlock is a mechanic that really needs more support and always is like just shy of actually getting enough. Speaking of, hey, here's a way to actually discard things, but not enough to actually want to to play. Savage Ymirjar. 5-cost 7/7, not a 4-cost 7/7. We lost out in the meme. But with Rush and Battlecry, discard 2 cards. Unlike some of the discard things, this is not a discard to, most like least expensive cards, which we did see that Fellhound got changed to. So it's, I think, again, you just need more payoffs for discard. This is obviously like a pretty powerful thing as a 7/7 Rush for 5. But you just need more ways to actually take advantage of discarding cards. In order for anything like this that is costing you so many cards per card to realistically actually include in your deck. Next up, we have Infantry Reanimator. It is a 6-cost 4/4 with Battlecry. Resurrect a friendly undead, give it reborn. Well, a 7/7 Rush would be a pretty powerful undead to resurrect, but you discarded it. Sorry. No, but the sort of new archetype that is largely supported in this set does seem to be the sort of make big undead, in part from this guy, and largely, though, from this guy. Amorphous Slime. So this 5-cost 5/3 with Battlecry, discard a random undead, death rattle, summon a copy of it. So if you're playing with just big undead, then this fellow can do a lot of really, really terrifying work, in part thanks to cards like this. Darkhand Drathier, an 8-cost 6/6 with Lifesteal. They in turn deal 6 damage to the enemy hero. So you can discard that guy, or say another gigantic undead, with your ooze, and then get a copy of it when it dies, much earlier than you normally would. Especially, that was actually, especially along with this. Shallow Grave. Trigger a friendly minion's death rattle, then destroy it. So on, say you have the coin, right? On turn 6, you can play your ooze, discard your guy who does 6 at the end of the turn, coin, Shallow Grave, get 2 of those, just blast your opponent for 12 at the end of your turn and gain 12. So it's kind of Q-block-ish, right? You're getting a lot of just like early big things off of the ooze and then the Shallow Grave. Obviously, there are other big undead things that you could include, but this guy seems like the scariest, especially to get early and to get multiple copies of in a lot of matchups. But before I clicked over to Shallow Grave, we had this Soul Barrage. This is a 5-cost spell. When you play or discard this, deal 6 damage randomly split among all enemies. So this actually was a card that I forgot existed. I was talking about how there weren't enough payoffs. I still think there probably aren't, because this is just like a most likely going to shoot some stuff. But this is actually a pretty sweet payoff to have as another discard effect. It's a little awkward that it's so expensive, right? Because if you are playing a lot of the discard things like Lakari Fellhound, discard your cheapest things, and that is unlikely to discard the Soul Barrage. I am curious how they, if you discard multiples at once, I guess it's probably just like it discards them in order and resolves the triggers in whatever order they discarded. But say you discarded the, destroy a random enemy minion and this at the same time, you're going to hope that you destroy the minion first, then blast your opponent if they only have 1 minion, or vice versa if they have a bunch of minions and you'd like to soften them up and then kill the biggest one. Next up, Scourge Supplies. So this is another enabler. which is actually an interesting card, right? Because this is choose a card to discard, right? This is a pretty powerful option that you rarely have from the discard effects. Most discards are random, but this one specifically is you choose. But it also is only among those cards you drew. This isn't choose a card to discard. This is choose one of the cards you drew to discard. So with the various payoff cards, you normally want to have them in your hand when you're discarding. This one, it's like, hey, please, I hope the top 3 cards of my deck are something that has discard synergy. But this is definitely a pretty strong enabler. And I think that maybe with that Scourge Barrage there, maybe are just enough payoffs. Speaking of payoffs, Twisted Tether. This is a payoff for your opponent doing something. Although it can also be a payoff for you doing something. Destroy a minion, give it stats to a random undead in your hand. So crucially, this is basically a righteous defense, right? Crucially, it does not say opposing minion, right? You can destroy your own minion if you really want to / need to with it. It can be a way to activate your ooze, or just a way to get more stats on something that you are interested in putting a copy into play with your ooze. So it's I have seen some people say like, oh well, why would you play that? Like Righteous Defense is 3. It's like Righteous Defense is a Paladin card. This is a Warlock card, and Warlock gets a life tap. So typically their cards are historically less powerful than those of other classes, at least their spells. But that is definitely a powerful way for an undead deck, or specifically an ooze deck, to get even bigger stuff to copy, because you're probably going to have very low number of undead in your deck in order to ensure that you're only getting the big ones with your ooze. But last and but not least, Devourer of Souls. 1 cost 1/3 undead. If a friendly minion dies, gain its death rattle. This should not be in the same deck as your ooze. It might seem like it because it wants to gain death rattle, and that has a death rattle. But it's also an undead that could accidentally go into play off your ooze. You don't really want, I don't think. I think that's a bad choice. But this card's really cool. I have definitely played a bunch of various death rattle Warlock decks. One of the issues I have with this deck is that it's only 1 power, which means that if you are trying to play, like, say, a Desecrated Graveyard deck, this is going to die to your Desecrated Graveyard a huge percentage of the time, unless you have, like, specifically an egg in play, and that leaves you in a pretty awkward position when that's, exactly what you don't want to have happen. You want to have, say your Burning Blade Acolyte die, and then this gains that death rattle, and then boom, you have multiple death rattles in this, and it just gets to keep eating stuff and getting bigger and bigger and give you more sweet stuff. So I think it's a very cool card. There's not really that many things in Warlock that work with it super well right now, but Warlock does have lots of ways to sacrifice its own minions for value, like Grimoire, etc., that I think can allow you to set this up pretty well. It only costs 1, so the ability to like set this up with, say, Burning Blade Acolyte, my beloved, along with a way to kill your own thing, is not too difficult to get a lot of value off of it. But overall, yeah, I think like there's maybe on the threshold of it being worth trying to make a discard Warlock deck try to work. I think it probably still won't. The Warlock deck that I'm sort of the most optimistic for in terms of what I think actually has the most competitive potential is probably the ooze deck. I think that putting gigantic things in play early is something that has a long and tried and true history in Hearthstone, and I expect that deck, assuming that there's a good amount of undead support, and spoiler alert, there is, to have some real potential. All right, and at last, we are on the final class, which is Warrior. We're starting off with Silver Fury Stalwart. 6 costs 4/8, Taunt Rush. Can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. So this, I think, is obviously a card that doesn't look particularly exciting on its surface, but we've seen a bunch of like Taunt Warrior type cards. This is a very powerful option to actually buff up, because not only does it have Taunt and Rush, so it can have an immediate impact, it also can't be targeted. So, your opponent would have to have some sort of, minion effect or non-targeted way to actually remove it, which, granted, there, are a decent number of amounts. But, I think that, if we look at, say, this card, Last Stand, draw a taunt minion, double its stats. This is, boom, suddenly you have an 8/16, can't be targeted, rush taunt for 6. And that's actually pretty exciting, right? We haven't really seen any of the sort of Taunt Warrior stuff actually find a home anywhere. But that card is one of the best ways to, use, say, this, and then the bulk up, make a copy of it. You just have a bunch of gigantic taunt minions. So I actually think that card is one of the best things to use alongside some of these things which, do exist in Warrior, but haven't really seen any play before. Does that mean I think that it is a super powerful card? No. But it means that I think that it is a potentially essential component to at least trying to make a deck based around that work. So I'm actually pretty curious. And while of course, playing a 4-cost thing which draws a card and doesn't do impact the board in any way is, pretty rough sell. It is in Warrior at least. And Warrior is a class that has the best tools for at least just survival in those sort of circumstances. Moving on, we have Light of the Phoenix. So there is a package of fire spells in Warrior in this expansion that I think are largely really, really compelling for Enraged Warrior. Enraged Warrior is a deck that I obviously have a pretty soft spot for and have messed around with in a bunch of different metagames. And right now, with March of the Lich King currently in Standard, Enraged Warrior is actually very good. A big part of that is specifically animated Berserker, giving you the ability to curve out into your infused decks, imbue decks, the infused imbue decks. Not confusing in any way. But one of the issues that the Enraged Warrior style of deck has had when it doesn't have just simply the ability to overwhelm the opponent immediately with just raw stats, because it can immediately enable stuff, is card draw. And a big issue that want to be able to solve in any kind of aggressive deck is, hey, what happens if I just, my opponent deals with my stuff, right? And this is a great way. Obviously, if your opponent's killing your stuff, this could be hard to cast, but this is a great way to, reload and find your key cards in a Warrior deck that is damaging its own minions. Worth noting, this is 1 less for each damage-friendly character. So this does count your hero. That's something that can influence the way you want to play the game, in addition to like the cards you actually put in your deck. Like for instance, if Light of the Phoenix is in your deck, there's a good chance, even if you don't have a 2-drop against a lot of matchups, you do not want to armor up on 2, because that prevents you from being able to get damaged as easily. And obviously very matchup dependent, but you might not want to armor up at all, so that you can get your Light of the Phoenix off for 1 cheaper thanks to your face being damaged. Also something that's worth thinking about when you are playing against Warrior. Maybe you don't want to just hero power and hit them if you know that they're playing a Enraged Warrior deck, and you want to make it at least somewhat more awkward for them to just get their card draw online. I think this is a pretty central card to at least that kind of Enraged Warrior deck, which is likely to be the Enraged Warrior deck that sees play once animated Berserker and such rotate. But speaking of, also Blazing Power. Give a minion +1/+1. Repeat for each damaged friendly character. Again, character. So crucially, this is another card that wants you to get your face hurt. Hurt me. Someone gift that. Anyway, but yeah, Blazing Power. Everything that I just talked about with the card draw works here. And this is also something that I think makes you lean more toward, hey, maybe I actually want to play like Whirlwind effects in my deck, right? Because you can Whirlwind, Blazing Power for a ton of damage if you have a wide. Super strong card. And, I think I've seen people say like, oh, well, this is like, this is basically Rampage, and Rampage was never very good. It's like, well, Rampage actually was good in certain decks. You didn't really have any of the tools to make it a like Enraged type Warrior deck work. Most of the times that Rampage was actually in Standard, like there just weren't appropriate tools for it. And this obviously it's not Rampage, but it's a Rampage effect that can scale. Also, crucially, this is a format where you get to play with a 2-cost charge minion, right? Like Crazed Wretch into Whirlwind into Blazing Power can just be like nuke you, right? You have just the ability to, just absolutely explode your opponent with burst damage from hand thanks to this card. And I think that's a very, very big deal. You can cast 2 of them in 1 turn because it's so cheap. So yeah, I think this is a very powerful card, and something that you are going to see a lot of games against Enraged Warrior end with. Next up, we have Sun Fury Champion. This is obviously pretty key card in combination with the card we were just talking about. Sun Fury Champion, after you cast a fire spell, deal 1 damage to all minions. So maybe you don't even need to play Whirlwind. Maybe you're just playing the fire spells alongside this. Most of the fire spells, there aren't very many fire spells in Warrior, right? Like obviously, like most of them that do exist are the ones we're talking about right now. In this set, there's the Forge and Flame is basically, I think, the only other one that exists. But yeah, this unfortunately with Blazing Power, you will get the trigger from this after the Blazing Power resolves. But fortunately, there are other fire spells for you to combo with, like this one, Sunfire Smithing. 4 cost, equip a 4/2 sword, give a random minion in your hand +4/+2. So this card is interesting. My gut is that, well, my expectation is that a lot of people will just look at this and be like, sweet, fire spell to play with my fire stuff. Oh, I have like charge minion stuff. I want to buff them. I'm not sure this card wants to be an Enrage Warrior. I think this is a powerful card, but I'm not sure this card wants to be an Enrage Warrior, and the reason for that is that I think Imbued Axe is too good. Imbued Axe is the best card in your deck. If you're playing Rage Warrior, Imbued Axe is the single best card in your entire deck. It is the reason the deck wins basically any games. And this overwrites it. So you're gonna, maybe you can play like a copy of this because, like, hey, the hand buff's pretty good, the weapon might be all right, the fire spell triggering your Sun Fury is okay. But my like guess is that the best version of Rage Warrior probably won't use this card. It can be good with like Forged in Flame too. Maybe you're playing a really heavy fire list. I feel like, yes, obviously it can work with this. Maybe you're playing a deck that's not necessarily just looking to nuke your own stuff, right? Not necessarily like looking to use Sun Fury Champion just to damage your own thing. Maybe you want more fire spells because you're using that as your like AoE against Imp decks or something. So you want to, play like that. And you play Forged in Flame, so you have a way to get rid of it, draw some cards. I don't know. But yeah, my guess is that this is probably not likely to be included in the best version of Rage Warrior just because Imbued Axe is so much more important. But speaking of fire spells and incentives to play fire spells, Thori Belor. I don't know how this is supposed to be pronounced, but anyway, it's a 4 cost 4/4 Rush Death Rattle, goes dormant. Cast a fire spell and revives it. So this is a really powerful card. It is obviously not like a card that specifically wins the game for you or anything like that, but it is really, really, really good. 4 cost 4/4 Rush. Fine, right? Not amazing, but fine. It's totally a solid card, but 3 of them for that 4 mana, really powerful, right? This is if anything, this is like the reason to play, like maybe looking to play like a mid-range fire warrior deck that isn't necessarily pure like enrage aggro, and this is a big part of that. Also a big part though, this Ambers of Strength, 2 cost fire spell, summon 2 1/2 guards with taunt, mana thirst 6, give them +1/+2. I think this card is quietly very good, and the reason for that is twofold. One, it's a fire spell, so it works with Thori Balori or whatever it is. Thor Balor, but also works with the Sun Fury guy to give you a fire spell that AoEs. It is also giving you multiple minions that will, if you play this, get damaged by the AoE from the Sun Fury. It's Sun Fury something. Sun Fury Champion. Sun Fury Champion. Okay. So if you have Sun Fury Champion in play, you play this, you get the AoE on these guys, which then can immediately get them buffed by Imbued Axe, or have them count for your damaged minions for Blazing Power. Yeah, I think this is just a really solid card. Also gives you multiple minions in play to protect a Anima Extractor or whatever. I do think this is a very, very good card, right? So overall, super solid. Definitely expect that to be a key component of these decks. Next up, we have Disruptive Spellbreaker. 5 costs 4/5. At the end of your turn, your opponent discards a spell. Hell yeah. Absolutely hell yeah. I love it. I think that Hearthstone needs, disruption for every card type. And I love that this is actually a good way. It's not like a super powerful way, right? Like it's a 5 cost 4/5, right? Terrible stats. But this is a great way to disrupt any kind of spell-based combo deck. Like, hey, look. You're playing, like Big Spell Mage. You're playing Jackpot Rogue. You're playing whatever. It's just a really sweet card. It gives a control warrior type deck, a way to disrupt spell-based stuff rather than just minion-based stuff. It's just great. And like it is probably not terribly likely to get like multiple activations off against most decks, right? Because it's pretty inefficient. It's like maybe you can protect it with a taunt minion. Maybe this is the way the taunt deck You make a gigantic taunt, play it out there, boom, disruptive spellbreaker, and now your like druid opponent is like, oh no, all of my spells, they're gone. But yeah, I think it's sweet. I like this card, and any kind of disruption like this is both, in my mind, welcome in the game of Hearthstone, as well as something that I, will certainly expect to see play. And lastly, for Warrior, and lastly for class cards at all, Azvedon the Grand Shield. Battlecry, cast a copy of the last spell your opponent played. I guess it's like a spell reflect or something is kind of the theme of it. But this is a weird card. It's a pretty powerful card. It's very situational, but being able to like, against Druid, this card's nuts, right? Like, it's like, oh, you nourished, I nourished. Your Scale of Onyxia, my Scale of Onyxia. Your Miracle Growth, my Miracle Growth. But yeah, overall, I think this is a super, super sweet card. At its best in a metagame that is like, heavily big spells, obviously. And certainly going to be pretty terrible in a lot of matchups where we'll just sit your hand. But overall, I think it's a really, really, really cool card and a very powerful card, and one that I expect metagame contingent will see a significant amount of play. Super cool. I love it. But yeah, overall, Warrior, I feel like Warrior's in a weird spot because I feel like the tools for Enraged Warrior are probably worse than the tools that are going away with March of the Lich King leaving, right? Or rather, Wrath of the Lich King leaving. With Wrath of the Lich King leaving and Animated Berserker leaving, you're losing probably one of the best cards in those decks. I do think that the Fire package is pretty strong, and I think that it gives you more like burst potential, more ability to like win games out of nowhere with Blazing Power. And the Sun Fury fellow, whose name I already managed to forget despite looking it up moments ago, but at the cost of just the snowbally temple thing. Knights of the Frozen Throne. I keep calling it Wrath of the Lich King because this is March of the Lich King, but it's actually Knights of the Frozen Throne. Wrath of the Lich King was the World of Warcraft expansion. This is the Hearthstone expansion. They are completely different things. But anyway, yeah, I really like the Enraged Warrior stuff, and I also like the possible options for actually making a Taunt Warrior deck have any amount of viability, as well as the disruptive and sort of utility things like Azvedon here. Lots of cool things, and I certainly expect to experiment with pretty much all of them. This is probably the first class that I'm just like, I look at pretty much every card and I'm like, you know what, I want to try that, and that says a lot. So definitely looking forward to playing some Warrior. And at last, we are in the final stretch, which is Neutral. Our first card to talk about, well, we've already played it. Sunwell. Sunwell was the card that was added to Standard early, and it's kind of weird that it is a neutral spell that is holy, but has definitely been a pretty powerful inclusion in stuff like Jackpot Rogue. Certainly excited to play it in the play all the cards that didn't start in your deck Mage, but I do think this is a card that is unlikely to continue to see tons of play. It is certainly an interesting option for any deck that has specific synergy with stuff that is either from other classes or starts outside your deck, but certainly not something that I expect to see a ton of. And it is cool that we actually have a neutral spell, though. That is sort of an innovation that we have not seen up till now in Hearthstone, and I'm glad that we actually are getting that design space covered because it leaves us with more options for the future. Next up, Silvermoon Sentinel, 2/5 taunt with Mana Thirst, 8. Gain +2/+2 and Divine Shield, 3 cost. Meh. The Mana Thirst, I think is a really cool keyword that does give a lot of cards a lot more like potential to actually be used in more interesting ways. This 2/5 for 3 is not terrible. Obviously with taunt and the sort of highlight of being able to be a 4/7 Divine Shield is pretty strong. Maybe, in some sort of specifically taunt-oriented deck, whether it's like Taunt Druid or Taunt Warrior, but I expect those decks mostly want to play things that are specifically big, and the Mana Thirst, I believe, is a cast trigger that doesn't turn into a different card, so it wouldn't come back as the larger version if you do Hadronox it. But definitely the sort of card that will be very powerful in Arena. Next up, Arms Dealer. This is pretty great. It literally is dealing out arms. After you summon Undead, give it +1 attack. 1 cost 1/2 Undead. This I think actually is potentially a strong card for a more aggressive undead oriented deck, like perhaps the Undead Druid that we discussed earlier. It is summon, not play, so it does work with things that make multiple cards, or the hero power from Death Knight. So I actually think that this is a totally reasonable card that has the potential to actually see a decent amount of play in undead focused aggressive decks. Next up, Coroner. 2-cost 2/2. Battlecry: freeze an enemy minion, mana thirst, silence it first. It's kind of a weird card. Maybe this is something that it becomes used as a neutral silence effect most of the time that you want silence effects, though feels like it is like in the early game against something like a Trog or whatever. Say your opponent like ramming mounts a Trog, you're really going to wish that you had the ability to silence it before turn 6. But it is, like definitely as a cheap potential silence effect, is an interesting utility option for pretty much any deck. So, it does have some potential for sure. Next up, we have Infected Peasant, a 2-cost 2/1 with Death Rattle summon a 2/2 undead peasant. Maybe this, see some sort of play in decks that care about specifically undead as well as Death Rattle stuff. It's not undead on the front side, which is a little bit awkward. But obviously, if your opponent's just letting you keep smashing them with the minion, you don't necessarily care too much about not having your undead just yet. Next up is Flesh Behemoth. 9-cost 4/8 taunt. Death Rattle, draw another undead and summon a copy of it. This is something that can be very powerful in a big undead type deck, like we were talking about the Warlock deck with the Ooze. Flesh Behemoth could be a potentially strong inclusion there. It is a Death Rattle effect, so you have a lot of different ways to get your big Death Rattles into play, or rather your big undead into play. Could end up just leaving you with sort of an awkward chain though. If you have this and you'd rather get a big thing, this comes into play, they silence it, and you're like, oh, awkward. But I think this is potentially a strong card in a just like ramp 2 gigantic undead decks. Next up, Infectious Ghoul, a 5-cost 5/4 with Death Rattle. Give a random friendly minion Death Rattle, summon an Infectious Ghoul. This I think is a pretty strong card, as the top end of an undead type deck. Specifically, your opponent has to kill everything else and then kill this, or else you're going to have this resummon off of your other minion. So this is obviously not itself going to just win you the game, because you have to have a board with other stuff. But if you have a bunch of Death Rattle sticky type minions, it has very much a Grey Bow effect, right? It doesn't have taunt, so your opponent doesn't have to get through this first. They can pick off the other things rather than killing that. But again, if you have a bunch of things that have Death Rattle on them, so that they're going to summon something else, which again, lots of undead, reborns, and Death Rattles. Even if they kill everything at the same time, as long as this Death Rattle happened last, it will have the Death Rattle that will go on the minion that came out of another minion's Death Rattle. So definitely a card that's going to have some Defile / Spammy Arcanist type math performed to figure out if they can actually get rid of it at any given time. I think it's actually a pretty strong card. Next up is Sun Fury Clergy, a 3-cost 2/4 Battlecry. Restore 3 health to all friendly characters. Mana thirst 6, restore 6 health instead. We've come so far from Earthring Farseer. Maybe this sees some play in things that care about healing. I don't know. Probably not. There's not enough heal synergy stuff for anyone to really care about this over any other options that they might have in their actual class. Next up, we have Street Sweeper. 4-cost 2/2 Battlecry, deal 2 damage to all their minions. So for one, I love that this is a sweeper that is literally a broom. It's pretty sweet. But no, this is a just neutral AoE, 4-cost 2 damage AoE that comes with the body attached. It's not great by any means, but could actually see some play in some decks for sure, I think. Not every class necessarily even has something that good. Next up, Silver Moon Armorer. 4/4 rush, mana thirst 7, +2/+2. Meh. It's this is another wow, this will be good in arena card, but I think that pretty much any class could do better than this. Not really much rush synergy specific stuff, so I don't really think this is likely to see play. Next up, Plague Spreader. Death Rattle, transform a random minion in your opponent's hand into a Plague Spreader. This is cool. So another disruptive card. This has the potential to be silenced, and it can also mess you up, right? If you have this and your opponent, you Plague Spreader them, they get to Plague Spreader you back. This is a disruption card that if your deck doesn't care, right, about any specific thing, great. I think it's actually particularly interesting. You could play this in a Death Rattle Priest deck, and this can be basically your disruption, right? You just keep bringing back Plague Spreaders with various things, and just absolutely rip your opponent's hand apart. The more they think about this, the more I love it. Like, you get to play Death Rattle Priest. It's a 4-cost 4/4. It's not good, but like, you can just turn your opponents like Denathrius, they're whatever. You just keep turning things into Plague Spreaders. You keep like amuleting them back, more Plague Spreaders. It's pretty hilarious. So you just have to make sure that you're not planning on winning with a specific minion. You win with your Zarella. Let's go. Plague everywhere. So we have Foul Egg, a 1-cost 0/2 undead. Summons a 3/3 undead chicken. This card's great for, I was talking about like having like Egg Druid, Egg Warlock. This and Nerubian Egg, great ways to help support the Desecrated Graveyard plan, in particular with that 1/3 that I was talking about in Warlock that gains all the death rattles when things die. This is a zero power guy. I was gonna say 0 health. Not a 0 health guy, then it would just instantly be dead. But it's a 0 power guy that gives you a 3/3, so you can use that with Graveyard, and boom, there you go. You got yourself a couple of minions. So more eggs, all the better. Definitely, solid card with a lot of buffs. Definitely a solid card with sacrifice effects. Definitely a solid card with a lot of undead things. So I think this is quietly a pretty heavy role player in a lot of different decks. Next up is Invincible. This is the Lich King's Horse. 8-cost 5/5, Reborn, Battlecry, and Death Rattle give a random friendly undead +5/+5 and taunt. This is a pretty powerful card with the fact that it's Battlecry and Death Rattle and has Reborn. So this is a ton of stats. This is Bone Mare plus. Obviously, can only affect undead. So it doesn't actually necessarily, do the exact Bone Mare things. And it's more expensive than Bone Mare, at least before the nerf. But yeah, this is a pretty strong top end. I can definitely see this being something that ends up seeing play in like, any kind of like mid-range control undead focus deck as the sort of high end to give you either defense or finisher. Very powerful with Zarella. Boom. So many of my undead that are coming back are getting +5/+5 and taunt. Next up, we have Hawk Strider Rancher. 3-cost 2/5. After you play a minion, give it +1/+1 and Death Rattle. Summon a 1/1 Hawk Strider. Huh. It's a weird card. This is really good with the Shaman stuff that cared about Death Rattle stuff. There's a Shaman guy who doubles Death Rattles attached to him, and then there's the your guys get Death Rattle +1/+1s. So this is actually a really interesting card, specifically in Shaman. I think maybe this is good in. I assume the Hawk Striders are beasts, so this could be good in some versions of Hunter. It's also good specifically if you have like rush minions. Like a Spring Paw, you boom, get a 2/2 that makes a 1/1 when it dies. Send another one in, boom, 2/2, get a 1/1 when it dies. Does seem like it feeds infused stuff well. Pretty interesting card. I think this card is like quietly actually pretty solid in a lot of different decks. As to whether those decks can actually be good, I don't know. But it feels like it actually does kind of a lot of work, and it's a 2/5 for 3, so it doesn't easily die. Next up is Incorporeal Corporal. Ugh. 2-cost 5/5. After this minion attacks, destroy it. Undead. Meh. I mean, 5 damage for 2 mana. If you're actually just getting an attack in, is kind of sick. But yeah, probably pretty bad. Maybe just silence it too. This could be a Silence Priest thing. Probably not, but it could be. And so we have Bloodied Knight. 3-cost 4/5. At the end of your turn, deal 2 damage to your hero. I like this card. I think that having a much above rate creature that uses your life total as a resource, whether you're playing something like, warrior with a bunch of armor, whether you're playing priest, paladin, whatever. Hell, play this in Quest Paladin or Quest Warlock. Boom, get you going. It's pretty sweet. I actually like this card quite a bit. It could obviously just be like an aggro card too. It doesn't have any types, so it might not be good enough if you don't have anything that you're specifically using, the damage synergy for. But yeah, pretty cool card. Next up is Brittle Skin Zombie. Death Rattle. If it's your opponent's turn, deal 3 damage to them. So this is kind of the opposite. There's like the mountain armor guy, who I think is actually in Knights of the Frozen Throne, but that was played in like N'Zoth Warrior. That was like, okay, if your opponent trades into it, you get a bunch of armor. This is, hey, if they kill it, they take damage. So this is a pretty solid card for like an aggressive undead deck. Obviously if you're actually getting like a lot of a lot of damage in early with minions is a fine follow-up to keep bursting your opponent for a bit. It's a little bit, it's a, obviously quite vulnerable, but if your, opponent's like removing this, again, they just take damage anyway. So effectively, even if they kill it, it gets more or less an attack in. It is pretty similar to, the priest. There's the priest like 4/3 that's the same thing, except it's when it dies, just death rattle deal 3 to them, which I believe is also an undead. So maybe just have, a priest, an undead priest, like Shadow Priest deck that's just like overloading at a bunch of death rattles that damage your opponent and, kind of like racing them down even if they kill your stuff. Next up, we have Translocation Instructor. Battlecry, choose an enemy minion, swap with a random one in their deck. More disruption! More. But yeah, this is, kind of like a, there's the Vol'jin, but that hits their hand. This is a Vol'jin that swaps their deck. Yeah, if your opponent is playing a deck that only has specific combo minions, great. If they get one play, boom. Turn their small minion into a key minion, kill their key minion. This is also, interestingly, can actually swap can just be like, basically, if your opponent's playing like, say like your opponent's playing Buff Priest, right? They make a gigantic thing and you're like, all right, back in your deck. Get rid of that, which is interesting because it's not just like a hey, we're disrupting you. It can be like, hey, I'm getting rid of this individual big minion and trying to solve that problem. I think it's most likely to be used as a anti-disruption thing, or rather as a disruption thing, as an anti-combo thing. But it has other applications as well. Next up, we have Silvermoon Arcanist, a 3-cost 2/2 with spell damage +2. Battlecry, your spells can't target heroes this turn. So this is interesting. This is like, hey, this gives you utility spell damage. There's already, like, at least currently, there's Tainted Arcanist, which is spell damage +2 for your next spell, which costs less than this. Most of what you want to do with most spell damage stuff is nuke your opponent to death. So obviously there are some of the utilities things. There's, like in Hunter, for instance, there's the thing that only targets minions anyway that has Mana Thirst draw cards. There's also the untargeted deal, damage to 3 random enemies. This works extremely well with that. It works well with the cat summon spell kitties. So yeah, I mean, this does have some potential homes. Also, Tainted Arcanist will eventually be rotating out, and this can be sort of a replacement for that in decks that are looking to, do AoE sort of effects with it in whatever fashion. Next up, we have Bone Flinger. 2-cost 2/3. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, deal 2 damage. Probably not very good. It is deal 2 damage to any target. So this could be, you play like a guy, your opponent kills it, you use this to shoot their guy. My original estimation when I said probably not very good was that it would be a deal 2 damage to your opponent. But as a removal tool, if you just play a turn one like undead of some kind, and then if your opponent kills it, great, you get to Bone Flinger their guy. If they don't kill it, great, you can trade it into something and Bone Flinger their guy. So I think it's a totally reasonable card. If you are playing like a tempo undead style deck, which I think does feel like it has a good amount of support, this does seem like it could be a decent role player in that deck. Next up, we have Shatterskin Gargoyle, a 4-cost 4/6 taunt undead with death rattle, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. It's pretty expensive for what it is. You have to really care about the death rattle. Obviously, if you're playing some sort of deck that's like comboing with it, there's better options, I think. So it doesn't seem particularly impressive to me for either the effect or the stats and cost. That was Nerubian Vizier, a 3-cost 2/4. Discover a spell. If a friendly undead died after your last turn, it costs 2 less. We have seen a lot of Venomous Scorpions over the lifetime of that card in Standard. And this is not quite Venomous Scorpion Plus because, it isn't poisonous, so it can't kill like a huge minion or whatever, but it is undead, so it has synergies with undead stuff, and obviously can be better than Venomous Scorpion in terms of giving you the discount on the card. So I think this is just a strong card. This is just a very, very powerful card for any kind of like mid-rangey deck that is using undead synergies. The possibility of just getting discount stuff, really good. Discovering spells, we've learned, very good. So definitely just a solid card that I do expect to see a good Jenga play. Next up, we have Astalor Bloodsworn. 2-cost 2/2 with Battlecry, add Astalor the Protector to your hand, and Mana Thirst 4, deal 2 damage. So this is a 2/2 that gives you, boom, a 5/5 for 5. So 2/2 for 2 gives you a 5/5 for 5, and each of them have Mana Thirst. So Astalor can be 2 damage. Then it is 5 armor, and then the final stage of Astalor is Battlecry, deal 8 damage, randomly split among all enemies, Mana Thirst 10, deal 8 more. So this is a like just very powerful card in any deck that's looking to play a longer game. One card that effectively is 3 cards is just kind of fundamentally pretty strong for any kind of attrition style strategy. And then, 2 damage in the early game, 5 armor in the mid game, and then a 8 to 16 damage AoE in the late game just seems really strong. So, this is obviously as a neutral card, can go into basically any deck. So I think this is just a very, very solid card that I do expect to see a lot of play in a lot of different decks. Next up, we have Vrykul Necrolite, a 2-cost 2/2 undead. With Battlecry, give a friendly minion Death Rattle, summon a 2/2 zombie with Rush. So we've talked a lot about the sort of sticky nature of a lot of the undead minions. With Death Rattling, this one giving anything Death Rattle, doesn't have to be undead. But yeah, I mean, I feel like this is just a great tool for any kind of undead like aggro mid-rangey type deck. If you're playing a lot of 1-drops, it's a great follow-up to basically anything. 2/2 that effectively gives you another 2/2 that is at least somewhat removal resilient, and is a zombie that can help with Rush, that can help you specifically both remove the board as well as trigger undead synergies, thanks to being able to get itself immediately killed and then just play something out. So I think it's just a very solid card for undead decks. Next up is the card with the best game text in the history of Hearthstone, Battlecry, Die. So 3-cost 5/4 with Reborn, Battlecry, Die. So when you play this, you get yourself a 5/1, but you can then reanimate a Scourge Rager, so you have a 5/4 Reborn at 3. So this is just sweet. I don't think this card is actually going to be good. There is you could play a priest deck that plays this with the Animate Dead, so you just keep getting Scourge Ragers back, and it ends up being pretty powerful. But it's pretty sweet. It is worth noting that if you do play this in, say, Death Knight, you're getting your corpse count right away. Boom, you can immediately pull off the things that care about your undead having died this turn, because well, it's an undead and it dies right away. But yeah, I do think that if this does see any play, it is most likely going to be in something like Animate Dead Priest deck. But overall, yeah, this card is just hilarious. That's the biggest thing that I like about it, is it says Battlecry, Die. Next up, Drakari Embalmer. 3-cost 3/4. Battlecry, give a friendly undead Reborn. This can be powerful. Lots of undead with Death Rattles can be very strong with Reborn. And you can use this on a lot of different things that can be pretty sweet. So I don't know that this is necessarily good enough, but it is itself undead. If you're playing an undead deck with a bunch of undead that have Death Rattles, we'll have to look at all of what the different 1 and 2-cost undead that you might want to give Death Rattles to can be. But this is definitely a card to keep in mind. Can get a lot of value out of it and can do some powerful stuff for sure. It can also be used on more expensive undead, like that. You don't necessarily just have to be 1/2 curve. This can be you play a 3 or 4-cost undead, boom, Death Rattle, or Reborn it and get powerful Death Rattle effects multiple times. Next up, Umbral Geist, a 2-cost 3/1. Death Rattle, add a random shadow spell to your hand. This is an interesting card for I imagine actually not for a shadow deck. For decks that might actually specifically care about having multiple spell schools of stuff, maybe you're playing this in a deck that uses multicaster that cares about undead, because it is random, so it's not necessarily from your class or anything like that. It's not a discover effect. But the fact that it has 1 health, I think, is a really big issue. If this were a 3/2, I think this card would be great. But 1 health dying to most hero powers, and now also the Death Knight hero power, in addition to all the previous ones. I think this is, likely to be difficult to get significant value out of, or any kind of meaningful board presence from. But you do at least get a shadow spell when it dies. But there's just so many different shadow spells now, especially with this set, with a bunch of new shadow spells and classes that didn't even necessarily have shadow spells before, like Shaman. So it can be hard to really use that effectively, I think. Speaking of cards that can be hard to use effectively, Bone Lord Frostwhisper. 6-cost 6/6 with Death Rattle. For the rest of the game, your first card each turn costs 0. You die in 3 turns. This is a really neat card. For one, the fact that it's a Death Rattle means that you cannot necessarily control when it happens. It's not a battle cry. It's not like, hey, I'm going to set this up perfectly. Now I'm going to play this. This is, hey, we're gonna do this, and I hope we get it off right. I think this card's cool. I like combo enabler type cards that exist that have mitigation stuff. It's hey, if you stop your opponent from comboing, You know, when they're trying to use this, okay, the game's over. They lost. Oftentimes, it is the case with the way that some of the disruption works in Hearthstone. Um, but this can be silenced. This can be like stopped by like solid alibi or whatever. There's also all sorts of stuff that this can get messed up by. But I think it's a cool card, and I'm definitely excited to see the tension that it creates when it actually does appear in game. Next up, we have Banshee, a 1-cost 2/1. Death Threat will give a random friendly undead +2/+1. So this is, I think, like an okay like undead 1-drop. Obviously, like again, 1 health is a pretty rough place to be in a lot of instances. But this could just be like a 1-drop for your undead deck, right? If your opponent kills it, okay, they killed it. If they don't, well, like you get to land it with another undead, and you're getting pretty significant value out of it. So I think this card is like not great, but if there are not other great 1-drop options, can totally fill the role of, hey, this is the 1-drop undead that I play. Next up, Lorthamar Throne. 7-cost 7/7 Battlecry. Double the stats of all minions in your deck. This card's just cool, right? Like, I don't think that this card is likely to be particularly good, because once you get to that point, like, hey, now you then have to draw those cards, and the double stats have to matter. But it's definitely cool. Certainly a card that is really good with if you're playing like maybe in Big Shaman, right? Maybe you're playing this in like a King Crush deck. Maybe you're playing this in whatever. Maybe you're playing this in like Demon Hunter that has like the things to shuffle cards back into their deck. I don't know. It's cool though. It's very cool. It doubles the stats of all minions in your deck, not your hand. Crucially, so you can't like set this up so that you have your like big burst charge combo. You have to like have it in your deck. But yeah, I think this is like cool and dramatic. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be good, but I love the fact that it exists. Next up, we have Crystal Broker. 3-cost 3/2 with Mana Thirst 5. Summon a random 3-drop. Mana Thirst 10. Summon an 8-drop. This is, I think, kind of an interesting card. It's interesting because this doesn't like give it a battle cry, right? It's weird because like a lot of them, like a lot of the sort of Mana Thirst abilities, I assume that this is effectively a battle cry effect, right? And it happens when you play the card. But like, is this a battle cry? Does this work with Bran? I don't think that it does. I just don't know. It doesn't summon 2 minions at 10 mana. It says instead. So it's at 10 mana, it's summon an 8-cost minion instead. So it doesn't say battle cry. So my guess is that it doesn't work with Bran or doesn't work with Bolner or whatever. It's just interesting because it's like Mana Thirst is I guess essentially another way to explain that it has a battle cry when you play it. I don't know. It's interesting. Is it on the board when you play it? When it Mana Thirsts? I just don't entirely know. But I assume it works like a battle cry, and it only happens if it comes into play from your hand. And it's not like a colossal minion that would happen when it comes to play. But anyway, like I doubt this is actually like a particularly good card. This does seem like it could be maybe a solid card in Arena. Maybe it'd obviously be cool if you just kept shadow stepping this and getting a bunch of effectively like 3 and 1-cost 8-drop minions, but does not seem like it is powerful enough to really justify trying to play it in Constructed. Next up, we have Tenacious Sandlane, 5-cost 4/6 lifesteal undead. And the attacks deal 2 damage to the enemy hero. If this had like a little bit higher health, maybe this was like higher health, lower attack, it could be sweet. It's fine. I mean, it effectively attacks the opponent for 6 and life steals for 6, and it is undead, so it has some sort of synergies there. But doesn't really feel like it is likely to be quite efficient or quite powerful enough to really end up seeing play in Constructed. Next up is Enchanter. 3-cost 3/3. Enemy minions take double damage during your turn. Pretty interesting card. This could be a powerful tool with like one-sided AoE type effects. I don't really know like what this wants to go in. It's a powerful effect, but I just don't know like where you actually want to play it. Maybe there's a specific metagame where you really want to like have tools to like AoE clear like big stuff, and you need this. Like this plus like Grimoire or something. Grimoire being 4 damage AoE to your opponents with this is pretty powerful. This, maybe there's like a metagame with like tons of huge minions, right? And you want to play this in Mage to be able to like Flame Strike your opponent for 10 or something. Maybe you're using this with like a bunch of Demon Hunter, minion, like things that summon small things. So it's like every single one kills, kills more stuff. I don't know. It kind of feels weird. You can use this with Scale of Onyxia. Everything does 4, because that's just what you needed. Scale of Onyxia to be more powerful. Next, we have Amber Whelp. Okay, this card is awesome. So this is a 3-cost, 3/3 dragon. If you're holding a dragon, Battlecry deal 3 damage. Remember Scale Rider? Oh boy, Scale Rider was actually pretty good. And now, this is a dragon version of Scale Rider, so it triggers, other copies of itself. You can discover it off of things that discover dragons. It gets all this dragon synergy bonuses, like the Time Winder or whatever it is. And it's just 3 damage. This card is just great. I think this is a tremendous card for any kind of dragon heavy deck. Just super, super good. And one of the things that will aid Dragon Paladin in finally reaching the glory that it truly deserves. Next up is Sanctum Spellbender. Whenever your opponent targets another minion and spell, redirect it to this. Flag Bearers. For those of you who may have never played, it was Invasion Block. Invasion Block in Magic the Gathering. It was the Apocalypse, I think, right? Apocalypse, or was it Plane Shift? I think it was Plane Shift that had the Flag Bearer. Anyway, they were basically cards that your opponent had to target instead of your other stuff. But this is fine. There's not that many like targeted spells. Can you maybe you can use this to stop your opponent from able to shadow step their stuff, right? Can they shadow step your guy? What happens if they play a shadow step? Like if they shadow step, do they take your guy? How does that work? I don't know. It's neat though. Does it return it to your hand, or does it return it to their hand? I'm just really curious. Where does it go? This is a neat card. If there's specific this is obviously super super strong against buff decks, right? Like if your opponent's playing buff Paladin and you have this guy in play, it's oh, you wish you were not playing buff Paladin. But yeah, I think it's a cool card. There's it's obviously a face up Spellbinder or whatever, because it's a Spellbender. Hey, but it's a neat card. I don't really think that it's likely to see a ton of play unless there's a lot of very heavy targeted buff type decks. But overall, it is a cool card, and I'm glad it exists. But speaking of cool cards that I'm glad exist, this set, I'm super excited for March of the Lich King. That is our last card to talk about, but I do want to just talk about the set in general. I think there's a ton of really exciting things in this set. Obviously, Death Knight by itself is very exciting. I love the fact that they're bringing it in at the end of the year, and we're going to be able to have the sort of full rotation with Death Knight already in the mix, and not having everything really just shaken up once in the year with the first set, like we saw with Ashes of Outland and Demon Hunter. Now we get this big turnover with the addition of Death Knight here and all the new cards. And there's so many new cards, right? The set has the most individual cards of any set that has been launched since the release of the game, as well as just all the cards that are added in addition for Death Knight in the core set and the Path of Arthas and everything. So a lot of stuff I want to try to play. I'm definitely really excited about trying Undead Shadow Priest. Is one of the things that I think seems like it has a lot of potential. I want to see how the sort of Fire and Rage Warrior looks, and then obviously I want to play the all these cards that didn't start in my deck Mage, because like I said, Yogg-Saron is my patron god, and I must always praise him. So anyway, thank you all out there for watching and sticking along with me as I talked endlessly about lots and lots of cards. I am really looking forward to actually getting a chance to play with all of these. So yeah, release is December 6th. I will be doing a ton of streaming when the set comes out, and hopefully I can stay more in focus when all that happens. So anyway, thank you all very much for watching. If you have any particular thoughts on the set, what cards you are really excited about, be sure to let me know in the comments. And as always, hit that like, subscribe, notification button so you will not miss any of my videos as they come out with awesome decks for Death Knight and all the other classes. Thanks for watching. See you later, and goodbye.